There's an estate nestled deep in the Vermont hills, an old colonial mansion built in the 1600s, where time seems to hang heavy in the air. For decades, the locals of Ashmore Hollow have avoided that hill. Some say it's cursed. Others say the women who live there made a choice a long time ago. A choice that can't be undone. Between 1987 and 2004, 3 men, unrelated, from different backgrounds, vanished shortly after marrying into the same family. No bodies. No suspects. Only one detail connects them all. Each disappearance happened on a Sunday. This is not an urban legend. There are records, witnesses, and one survivor who lived to tell what he saw beneath the floorboards of that house. If you find yourself drawn to stories like this, subscribe for more investigations like it. And tell us in the comments, would you have accepted the invitation for Sunday lunch? Now, back to Ashmore Hollow, to the estate on the hill, and the family whose name still makes the town whisper. There's an estate nestled deep in the Vermont hills, an old colonial mansion built in the 1600s, where time seems to hang heavy in the air. For decades, the locals of Ashmore Hollow have avoided that hill. Some say it's cursed. Others say the women who live there made a choice a long time ago. A choice that can't be undone. Between 1987 and 2004, 3 men, unrelated, from different backgrounds, vanished shortly after marrying into the same family. No bodies. No suspects. Only one detail connects them all. Each disappearance happened on a Sunday. This is not an urban legend. There are records, witnesses, and one survivor who lived to tell what he saw beneath the floorboards of that house. If you find yourself drawn to stories like this, subscribe for more investigations like it, and tell us in the comments. Would you have accepted the invitation for Sunday lunch? Now, back to Ashmore Hollow, to the estate on the hill, and the family whose name still makes the town whisper. The locals call it Widow's Peak, not because of any geographical feature, but because of what happens to men who marry into the family that dwells there. The Allen Mansion looms against the Vermont skyline like a dark promise, its weathered colonial facade hiding secrets that stretch back to when America was still finding its identity. The year was 1987. Ronald Reagan was president. The Simpsons had just debuted as a short on the Tracy Ullman Show, and in the small town of Ashmore Hollow, a Boston architect named Michael Grayson was about to become the first in a series of disappearances that would haunt this community for decades. "I remember when he first came to town," says Joseph Hayes, former owner of the Crow's Nest Tavern, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as he stares into the distance. Good-looking fella. Confident. The kind who didn't belong in a place like this. But the Allen house, it needed work. And Michael was the best at historical restorations. The Allen family had been fixtures in Ashmore Hollow since before the Revolutionary War. Their lineage traced back to Europe, specifically, according to town records, to a region in Eastern Europe where witch trials had been particularly brutal. William Allen, the founder of the American branch, arrived with his wife in 1673, bringing with them unusual belongings that raised eyebrows even in that superstitious era: books in strange languages, silver implements with peculiar engravings, and a deed to land that hadn't even been surveyed yet. By 1987, the Allen household consisted of 4 women. Eleanor, the matriarch, a commanding presence whose husband had died under circumstances that raised questions but never enough for a formal investigation, and her 3 daughters, Catherine, Margot, and Lila. Each beautiful in her own way, but with something in their eyes that made townspeople cross the street when they approached. Martha Simmons, now in her 90s and one of the few who remembers the Allen sisters from her childhood, leans forward in her nursing home chair, her voice dropping to a whisper despite the empty room. They weren't like other girls. Their mother kept them close, homeschooled them. We'd only see them at church on Sundays, sitting in the back pew, never taking communion. And their eyes, all that same pale blue, like ice with nothing behind it. Except the youngest one, Lila. She had her father's eyes. Michael Grayson arrived in Ashmore Hollow in early 1987, commissioned to restore parts of the Allen mansion that had fallen into disrepair. What was meant to be a 6-week project stretched into months as he became fascinated with the unusual architecture of the house. He'd come in here most evenings, Hayes continues, gesturing around the now-renovated tavern. Show us these sketches he'd made. Said the house made no sense. Rooms that should lead somewhere led nowhere. Staircases that changed direction when you weren't looking. And the basement. He became obsessed with the basement. According to architectural surveys that would later be conducted by authorities, the Allen Mansion contains a substructure unlike any other colonial home in New England. Beneath the main house lies a series of chambers carved directly into bedrock, arranged in concentric circles around a central room. The configuration bears striking similarities to ancient ritual spaces found in parts of Eastern Europe. What happened next has been pieced together from police reports, witness statements, and local accounts. Michael Grayson, the outsider, fell in love with Catherine Allen, the eldest daughter. Their courtship was brief and conducted almost entirely on the grounds of the estate. By June, they were married in a private ceremony attended by few outsiders. "I was there," says Reverend Thomas Marshall, now retired from his position at St. Michael's Church. His hands tremble slightly as he recounts the ceremony. "It wasn't like any wedding I've ever performed. Eleanor insisted on certain modifications to the traditional service. The couple drank from a silver chalice instead of exchanging rings. And the vows? They weren't about 'till death do us part.' They were about binding essence to essence. I should have recognized the signs, but who believes in such things anymore?" For 3 months after the wedding, Michael continued his work on the mansion while living there with his new wife. Those who saw him in town noted a gradual change in his appearance. The once vibrant, enthusiastic architect grew gaunt, his skin taking on a grayish pallor, dark circles forming under increasingly vacant eyes. Edward Collins, who delivered mail to the Allen estate during that period, was the last person to see Michael Grayson alive. The statement he gave to police in 1987, recently unsealed as part of our investigation, contains disturbing details omitted from public records. "I brought a package to the house that Sunday morning," Collins stated. Michael answered the door himself. He didn't look well, like someone had been draining his blood, if you want the truth of it. His hand was shaking when he signed for the delivery. Behind him, on the floor of the entryway, I saw markings. Symbols drawn in something dark that looked fresh. When I asked if everything was okay, he got this strange smile and said, "Sunday lunch is a special tradition in the Allen family." Then Eleanor called from inside, and the look on his face. I'll never forget it. Pure terror, like a man who knows he's walking to the gallows. That afternoon, according to the official report, Michael Grayson went for a walk on the grounds of the estate and vanished. The search that followed turned up nothing except a trail that ended abruptly at the old well, a stone structure dating back to the original construction of the house. Detective Samuel Moore led the investigation. Now retired and living in Florida, he agreed to speak with us about the case that still haunts him. Something wasn't right from the beginning, Moore says, shuffling through copies of the original case files. The Allen women didn't report him missing. It was his firm in Boston, after he missed an important meeting. When we questioned them, they weren't concerned. Eleanor said some men couldn't handle the responsibilities of joining their family. Catherine showed no emotion at all, just sat there in that parlor, staring at nothing while we asked our questions. The investigation revealed troubling inconsistencies. Michael's personal belongings remained in the house, including his wallet and car keys. His bank accounts were untouched. No evidence of foul play was found, but cadaver dogs brought to the property exhibited unusual behavior, refusing to approach certain areas of the house, particularly the basement entrance. We wanted to do a more thorough search of those underground chambers, Moore continues, but Eleanor Allen produced documentation showing the basement was historically protected. We needed special permits, archaeological oversight. By the time we cut through the red tape, any evidence that might have been there was gone. The case grew cold. Without evidence of foul play, authorities eventually classified it as a missing persons case. Some speculated that Michael had discovered something in the house, something in those strange basement chambers, that had driven him to flee. Others whispered darker theories about sacrifice and ancient rituals. 5 years passed. The town of Ashmore Hollow gradually forgot about Michael Grayson. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be, with the Allen mansion standing on the hill like a silent reminder of unanswered questions. Then, in 1992, Dr. James Whitaker arrived to take over the small medical practice in town. and history began its dark repetition. "When you look at the pattern now, it's obvious," says Hayes, finishing his coffee. "But back then, we just thought the Allen women had bad luck with men. Nobody wanted to believe there was something hungry in that house. Something that had been feeding for generations." The sun sets over Ashmore Hollow, casting long shadows across the abandoned property where the Allen mansion once stood. The well remains, a silent sentinel marking the spot where men began to vanish on Sundays. And somewhere, if local rumors are to be believed, a silver chalice waits for the next marriage feast. When an ordinary man arrives in an extraordinary place, stories often unfold in predictable ways. But what happened to Dr. James Whittaker defies conventional explanation, because Ashmore Hollow is not a conventional town, and the Allen family does not follow conventional rules. What we know for certain is this. 5 years after Michael Grayson vanished from the Allen estate without a trace, Dr. James Whittaker accepted a position as the town's only physician. 5 months after that, he married Margot Allen. And 6 months after their wedding, on a Sunday in November 1993, he descended into the basement of the Allen mansion and never emerged. If you think this is mere coincidence, consider the evidence that suggests otherwise. But first, if you're finding value in this investigation, take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support allows us to continue uncovering stories that others would prefer remain buried. Now, let's examine what happened when the second man disappeared from Widow's Peak. Dr. James Whittaker arrived in Ashmore Hollow in the spring of 1992. A graduate of Johns Hopkins Medical School with a promising career ahead of him at Massachusetts General Hospital, his decision to relocate to a remote Vermont town puzzled his colleagues. The official explanation was burnout, a desire to practice medicine in a simpler setting. But documents recovered from his personal effects tell a different story. "I've read about a family in Vermont with unusual longevity patterns," Whittaker wrote in a journal entry dated January 15, 1992. "Multiple generations of women consistently outliving their husbands by decades, without showing normal signs of aging. If the Allen bloodline carries genetic markers for extended lifespan, it could revolutionize our understanding of human aging." Evelyn Price worked as Dr. Whittaker's receptionist during his time in Ashmore Hollow. Now in her 70s, she sits in her garden, fidgeting with her glasses as she recalls her former employer. "He was brilliant, that man. Too brilliant for a place like this," she says. "When he first arrived, he was full of energy, modernizing the clinic, making house calls, giving lectures at the community center about preventative care. But he was also curious about the Allen family from day one. Asked all sorts of questions, their medical history, family lineage, dietary habits." Within weeks of his arrival, Dr. Whittaker made a house call to the Allen estate when Eleanor complained of arthritis symptoms. According to Price, this first meeting with Margot Allen marked a turning point. "He came back different," she remembers. "Distracted. He'd stare out the window for minutes at a time. Started canceling appointments to make more visits to the Allen house, not just for Eleanor anymore, but to consult on family medical history," he said. Margot Allen was 28 at the time, described by those who knew her as ethereally beautiful, with the same pale blue eyes that marked all the Allen women. Unlike her older sister Catherine, who rarely left the estate after Michael's disappearance, Margot occasionally visited town, always accompanied by her mother, always leaving before sunset. "There was something about her," says Thomas Wilson, who owned the local pharmacy. "Men couldn't look away when she entered a room. It wasn't just beauty, it was like she had a gravity all her own. You'd find yourself telling her things you never meant to share." The courtship between James Whittaker and Margot Allen progressed rapidly. By autumn of 1992, they were engaged. The wedding took place in December, a small ceremony at the Allen estate, much like Catherine's wedding 5 years earlier. And like that previous ceremony, the couple drank from the same silver chalice instead of exchanging rings. "I delivered an invitation to Dr. Reeves at the next town over," Price recalls. "He was James's only friend from before. But he never attended. Later, I found the invitation in the trash, with a note scribbled on it, 'Don't drink from the cup.' I always wondered what that meant." After the wedding, Dr. Whittaker continued his medical practice, but with increasingly irregular hours. Those who saw him noted the same gradual deterioration that had marked Michael Grayson's final months. Weight loss, pallor, dark circles under increasingly vacant eyes. But unlike Michael, James left behind evidence of his growing concerns. A locked drawer in his office, opened after his disappearance, contained a journal documenting unusual observations. Patient exhibits remarkable cellular regeneration, reads one entry about Eleanor Allen, dated March 1993. Skin samples show telomere preservation consistent with someone decades younger. Blood work reveals unprecedented stem cell activity. This cannot be explained by conventional medicine. Later entries become more disturbing. April 17, 1993. Discovered ancient medical text in Eleanor's library. Contains references to vitality transference through blood ritual. Medieval superstition, but the diagrams match the chamber configuration beneath the Allen house. May 30, 1993. M's touch leaves me exhausted for hours. Measured my own blood parameters before and after intimate contact. Significant drop in iron, white cell count, and several markers I've never seen depleted before. Am I ill, or is something being taken from me? June 22, 1993. Found hidden room behind wine cellar. Walls covered with symbols matching Eleanor's silver chalice. Names carved into floor. Dozens of them. Some dating back centuries. All male. All with dates that fall on Sundays. The most telling entry came just 2 weeks before his disappearance. October 30, 1993. Eleanor explained the family tradition today. Says all Allen women participate in communion with their husbands. Claims it's merely symbolic, a ritual to bind the family together. But I've seen what's happening to me. Same thing that happened to Michael, I suspect. Something is being drained from me during these Sunday meals. Have been diluting my wine with salt water these past weeks. Feel stronger when I do. Must investigate further while I still have strength. His final entry, dated the morning of his disappearance, contains just one line. November 14, 1993. Catherine looking worse. Eleanor says today's communion must be stronger. I found the entrance to the central chamber. Going to document what's down there after lunch. If I don't return, look beneath the house. That Sunday afternoon, according to statements from the Allen women, Dr. Whitaker excused himself after their traditional family lunch to examine some historical features in the basement. When he failed to return for dinner, they assumed he had gone into town on an emergency call. He was not reported missing until 3 days later, when Price contacted authorities after he missed multiple appointments. Detective Moore, who had investigated Michael Grayson's disappearance 5 years earlier, immediately recognized the pattern. Same family. Same circumstances. Same complete lack of evidence, Moore told us. But this time, we had his journal. We knew there was something in that basement. When we searched the Allen property, we found his medical bag at the top of the basement stairs. Inside was a sample collection kit with labels for ritual residue and chamber wall material. But no sign of Whitaker himself. The investigation revealed another disturbing detail. In the basement, police found a white lab coat, identified as belonging to Dr. Whitaker, soaked in a dark substance. Initial field tests indicated the substance was blood, but subsequent laboratory analysis proved inconclusive. The lab said it wasn't fully blood, Moore explains, confusion still evident in his voice decades later. It contained blood components, but also organic compounds they couldn't identify. One technician compared it to partially digested tissue, like something had been breaking down the cellular structure. Unlike the previous investigation, authorities now had probable cause to conduct a more thorough search of the basement chambers. What they found has been largely redacted from official reports, but Moore shared select details that have never before been made public. The chambers were arranged exactly as Whitaker described in his journal, concentric circles leading to a central room. The walls were covered with symbols, the same ones found on that silver chalice the family used in their wedding ceremonies. And in the central chamber, we found a stone altar with drainage channels carved into it. The channels led to a collection basin, bone dry when we found it. Most disturbing of all was the discovery of names carved into the floor of the central chamber. Dozens of male names, each with a date beside it. All Sundays. All corresponding to marriage records from the Allen family line stretching back centuries. Michael Grayson's name was there. A space had been prepared next to it, apparently for James Whittaker. We brought in ground-penetrating radar, Moore continues. Scanned the entire property. Found anomalies consistent with tunnel systems extending from the well, the same well where Michael's trail ended, connecting to the basement chambers. But by the time we obtained permission to excavate, Eleanor had filed injunctions citing historical preservation statutes. The investigation stalled in legal battles. Without a body, without clear evidence of foul play, the case of James Whittaker, like Michael Grayson before him, was eventually classified as a missing persons case. The Allen women, Eleanor, Catherine, and Margot, remained in their mansion on the hill, increasingly isolated from the town below. But people noticed changes in the Allen women after James's disappearance. Catherine, who had grown gaunt and frail in the years following her husband's vanishing, suddenly appeared rejuvenated. Eleanor, despite being in her 70s, moved with the vitality of a much younger woman. Margot, however, began to show signs of the same deterioration that had marked her sister after Michael's disappearance. Within a year, she rarely left the estate. Those who glimpsed her described a woman aging before her time, her once luminous beauty fading like a flower cut from its roots. The town of Ashmore Hollow began to whisper more openly about curses and rituals. Parents warned their children to stay away from the hill where the Allen mansion stood. Local men crossed the street when they saw an Allen woman approaching. And in the shadows of Widow's Peak, a pattern was forming, a pattern that would remain incomplete until one final element was added to the equation. Lila Allen, the youngest daughter, who had left for college before James Whittaker arrived in town. The only Allen who had never participated in what Eleanor called their Sunday communion. In 2004, Lila would return to Ashmore Hollow. With her came Daniel Harper, a journalist with an investigative mind and no knowledge of the fate that awaited men who married into the Allen family. The stage was set for the final act in a drama that had been unfolding for generations. When we look back now, says Price, her voice dropping to a whisper, we should have burned that house to the ground after Michael disappeared. Instead, we let it happen again. And we almost let it happen a third time. As the sun sets over what remains of the Allen property, one cannot help but wonder what became of James Whittaker. Was his fate the same as Michael Grayson's? Did he discover the truth about the Allen family's longevity, a truth written in ritual and blood rather than genetics? The answers may lie in what Daniel Harper found in those final days before the Allen mansion was finally demolished. But that is a story for another chapter in this dark history. When the people of Salem were hanging witches, the Allen women were already practicing something far older and far darker than anything the Puritans could imagine. Their secrets traveled across an ocean, buried in the timber and stone of a mansion that would become both sanctuary and prison for generations to come. To understand what happened to Michael Grayson and James Whittaker, and what nearly happened to Daniel Harper, we must first understand the Allen family's origins and the ancient pact that bound them to their ritual. If this investigation has captured your interest, please subscribe for more explorations into America's hidden histories. And tell us in the comments, do you believe some secrets should remain buried, or does truth deserve excavation no matter how disturbing? Now, let's peel back the layers of time to reveal what the Allen women brought with them to the New World. The story begins not in Vermont, but in a remote region of the Carpathian Mountains in the 1660s. Church records from the village of Schwarzwald, now lost to modern maps, document the trial of Eleonora Allenescu, accused of practicing blood rituals to extend her life and that of her daughters. According to transcripts preserved in the Vatican archives, Eleonora was believed to be over 100 years old, though she appeared no older than 40. The Allenescu case represents one of the most thoroughly documented witch trials of the era, explains Dr. Miriam Kovacs, professor of European folklore at Columbia University. Unlike many accusations of the time, the evidence against Eleonora was substantial. Multiple witnesses reported seeing her and her daughters drinking from a silver chalice during rituals held on sacred Sundays. After each ritual, the women appeared rejuvenated while their male companions grew increasingly frail. Before Eleonora could be executed, she and her 3 daughters disappeared from their cells. Records indicate they fled to England, where they changed their name to Allen and arranged passage to the American colonies. Among the items they brought with them was a silver chalice, the same one that would later be used in the wedding ceremonies of Catherine and Margot Allen. William Allen, the merchant who ostensibly founded the American branch of the family, appears in historical records as Eleanora's husband. Ship manifests show he traveled with the women to America, but town records from early Ashmore Hollow suggest he died shortly after the mansion's completion, the first in a long line of Allen husbands to meet an untimely end. The pattern is remarkably consistent, says Professor Kovacs, reviewing the genealogical records. In each generation, Allen women marry relatively late in life. Their husbands die within a year. The women then live for decades, sometimes as long as a century, without showing normal signs of aging. Then, as their vitality finally begins to fade, their daughters marry and the cycle continues. What makes the Allen case unique is not just the longevity of the women, but the method by which they achieved it. According to documents found in a hidden compartment of Eleanor Allen's desk after the mansion was finally cleared for demolition in 2005, the ritual practiced by the family was derived from ancient Carpathian beliefs about life essence, what modern science might call cellular energy or life force. These documents describe a process they called communion, explains Dr. Kovacs. The ritual involved a gradual draining of vitality from a willing participant, usually a husband, culminating in a final extraction during a ceremony performed on a sacred Sunday. According to their beliefs, the complete essence of one individual could sustain 3 women for approximately 30 years. The communion ritual required specific conditions. The sacrifice had to be willing, at least initially, bound by marriage to one of the women, and truly in love. These requirements explain the careful selection of husbands throughout the Allen family history. Men who were intelligent, vital, and susceptible to the particular charms of the Allen women. The ritual also required a specific architectural space, concentric chambers leading to a central altar, reflecting the Carpathian belief in the spiral path between life and death. This explains the unusual basement structure of the Allen mansion, which was built to precise specifications carried from the Old World. Most disturbing of all, the ritual was designed to preserve not just the body of the practitioners, but to transfer certain aspects of the victim's consciousness. In essence, the Allen women were not just consuming life force, they were absorbing fragments of their husbands' minds. This explains accounts from townsfolk who noted personality changes in the Allen women after their husbands disappeared, says Professor Kovacs. Catherine Allen, described as cold and reserved before her marriage, began showing Michael Grayson's passion for architecture after his disappearance. Margot, once quiet and gentle, developed James Whittaker's interest in medicine. The mansion itself played a crucial role in maintaining the Allen women's extended lives. The very timber used in its construction came from trees surrounding the ritual sites in the Carpathian forests. The well that figured prominently in both disappearances was not merely a water source, it was a channel to underground springs believed to carry memory and essence. Water holds memory in many ancient traditions, explains Professor Kovacs. The Allen ritual used water as both conduit and preservative for the life essence they extracted. This explains why both Michael and James's trails led to or near the well. As generations passed, the Allen family became increasingly isolated from the Ashmore Hollow community. Their rituals required privacy, and the growing suspicions of townspeople made close relationships risky. By the time Eleanor Allen became matriarch in the 1960s, the family had all but severed ties with the town below their hill. Eleanor's husband Richard, a professor of anthropology who had initially been attracted to the family because of their unusual lineage, disappeared in 1970 after just 6 months of marriage. Police records from the time show a cursory investigation that concluded he had likely abandoned his family. There were no witnesses, no evidence of foul play, and Eleanor's considerable influence in the community ensured the matter was quickly forgotten. With Richard's essence to sustain her, Eleanor raised her 3 daughters in the traditions of their ancestors. Catherine and Margot embraced their heritage, but Lila, the youngest, showed resistance from an early age. Lila was different, recalls Sarah Jenkins, who taught briefly at the home school Eleanor established for her daughters. The other girls accepted everything their mother told them without question. But Lila asked why. Why did they live so isolated? Why did they practice such unusual traditions? Why couldn't she have friends from town? Jenkins was dismissed after less than a year when Eleanor discovered her encouraging Lila's questions. But her observations provide crucial insight into the family dynamic that would eventually lead to the ritual's undoing. As Catherine and Margot reached adulthood, Eleanor began preparing them for their roles in continuing the family tradition. According to the journals recovered from the mansion, each daughter was to marry and perform the communion ritual, thereby ensuring another generation of Allen women would preserve their unnatural longevity. Catherine's marriage to Michael Grayson in 1987 followed the pattern established centuries earlier. After a brief courtship designed to ensure genuine emotional attachment, they wed in a ceremony that included drinking from the ancestral chalice, initiating the slow draining of Michael's life essence that would culminate in the final ritual months later. The journals describe a gradual process, says Professor Kovacs. Each Sunday, a small ritual would be performed, usually after a family meal. The husband would drink from the chalice, not realizing it contained a compound that temporarily opened what the Allen women called the channels of essence. During these weekly rituals, small amounts of life force would be transferred to the Allen women, particularly the wife. These preliminary rituals explained the gradual deterioration observed in both Michael Grayson and James Whittaker during their brief marriages. They were literally being drained of life, Sunday by Sunday, until they were ready for the final communion. The final ritual, performed in the central chamber beneath the house, completed the transfer. According to Eleanor's journals, the husband would be brought to the altar, weakened but conscious, where the chalice would be used to capture his remaining essence as it left his body. This essence would then be consumed by the Allen women, with the largest portion going to the wife. The ritual wasn't designed to be fatal in the conventional sense, explains Professor Kovacs. In fact, according to their beliefs, the husband continued to exist within the women who consumed his essence. It was a form of immortality, just not one the men had knowingly consented to. This explains why no bodies were ever found. The ritual left behind a husk, a living shell drained of what made it truly alive. These husks were apparently kept in the tunnel system connected to the well, sustained in a twilight state that was neither fully life nor death. James Whittaker's journal entries suggest he began to uncover this truth during his research into the family's unusual longevity. His medical background allowed him to recognize the physiological changes occurring in his own body, and to connect them to the rejuvenation he observed in Catherine after Michael's disappearance. James was coming dangerously close to understanding the full scope of the ritual, says Professor Kovacs. His final journal entries indicate he had discovered not just the physical effects of the communion, but its deeper purpose, the preservation of the Allen bloodline and the absorption of their husband's consciousness. By 1994, after James Whittaker's disappearance, the pattern had become clear to at least some in Ashmore Hollow. Rumors circulated. Parents warned their children to stay away from the Allen property. Men avoided even casual contact with the remaining Allen women. And in this atmosphere of growing suspicion, Lila Allen, who had left for college before James Whittaker arrived in town, received word that her mother was ill. Eleanor, despite the rejuvenating effects of the ritual, was finally showing her age. The essence absorbed from Richard decades earlier was beginning to fade. According to Eleanor's journals, the family tradition dictated that when the matriarch's power waned, the youngest daughter would return to perform her own communion ritual, ensuring the continuity of the bloodline. Lila was summoned home, explains Professor Kovacs. But unlike her sisters, she had spent years away from the mansion, exposed to the outside world. And she was bringing with her a man who would not be so easily led to slaughter, Daniel Harper, an investigative journalist with a specialty in debunking supernatural claims. The stage was set for the final confrontation between ancient ritual and modern skepticism. Daniel Harper would enter the Allen mansion unaware of the fate that had befallen his predecessors. But unlike Michael and James, Daniel would have an ally within the family itself, Lila, the Allen daughter who had always questioned her inheritance. As the sun sets over the remains of the Allen property, the shadows seem to whisper of secrets not fully revealed. The mansion is gone now, demolished in 2005 after the events that ended the Allen family's centuries-long ritual. But the well remains, sealed with concrete and surrounded by warning signs, yet still somehow emanating a presence that makes visitors hesitate. What Daniel Harper discovered in that well, and how he survived to tell his story, will be revealed in our next chapter. But one question remains. If the ritual sustained 3 women for decades, what happened to those women when their source of vitality was suddenly cut off? The answer lies in the final days of the Allen mansion, when centuries of unnaturally extended life came due all at once. When Daniel Harper drove up the winding road to the Allen mansion in October of 2004, he was not looking for a story. He was accompanying his girlfriend, Lila Allen, who had been summoned home due to her mother's failing health. By profession a skeptic, by nature a rationalist, Daniel had no reason to suspect that he was entering the final act of a centuries-old ritual, or that he would become the only man to learn the Allen family secret and live to expose it. Before we continue, if you've been following this investigation, take a moment to subscribe and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Daniel's place? Would you have recognized the signs that something was wrong, or would you, like those before you, have dismissed the warnings as small-town superstition? Now, let us examine the events that led to Daniel Harper's fateful Sunday in the Allen mansion. Unlike Michael Grayson and James Whittaker, Daniel Harper did not come to Ashmore Hollow by chance. He met Lila Allen at Northwestern University, where she was studying psychology and he was finishing his master's degree in investigative journalism. Their relationship developed far from the shadows of Vermont, in the bright lights of Chicago, where Lila had created a life deliberately disconnected from her family heritage. She never talked about her family, recalls Marcus Reynolds, who shared an apartment with Daniel during this period. Not in the normal way people do. When we'd all share stories about growing up, Lila would get this look, like she was calculating what to say. She'd mention Vermont, her sisters, but never details. Daniel found it mysterious. I found it concerning. When Eleanor's health began to decline rapidly in the fall of 2004, Lila received a letter, not a phone call or email, requesting her immediate return to Ashmore Hollow. Daniel, between assignments and curious about the family Lila so rarely discussed, offered to accompany her. He joked about finally meeting the mysterious Allen clan, Reynolds remembers. Said he'd always wanted to see a real Vermont mansion. The night before they left, he called me, excited about exploring what he called authentic American Gothic. He had no idea how literal that description would prove to be. Daniel and Lila arrived at the Allen estate on Friday, October 15, 2004. By Sunday, October 17, Daniel would be fighting for his life in the chambers beneath the mansion, and the centuries-old ritual would face its first true challenge. The Allen mansion that greeted them had changed since James Whittaker's disappearance 11 years earlier. The once immaculate grounds had grown wild and overgrown. The paint was peeling, the shutters hanging askew. Only the distinctive colonial architecture remained unchanged, the bones of the house as solid as they had been when first constructed in 1675. It was like walking into a time capsule, Daniel would later write. Everything from the furniture to the paintings on the walls seemed frozen in another century. The air inside was heavy with the scent of dried herbs and something else, something metallic that reminded me of hospitals. Eleanor Allen, now in her 80s, received them in the main parlor. Though obviously frail, she maintained the commanding presence that had intimidated generations of Ashmore Hollow residents. Catherine, now 49 but looking much younger, and Margot, 45 but showing signs of rapid aging, flanked their mother like sentinels. That first evening established a pattern. Eleanor dominated conversations, directing them toward Daniel's background and feelings for Lila. Catherine watched with cold calculation. Margot alternated between agitation and exhaustion, and Lila grew increasingly withdrawn and anxious. On Saturday, Daniel began exploring the mansion while the Allen women remained in their rooms. It was during this exploration that he first noticed the unusual architectural elements that had fascinated both Michael Grayson and James Whittaker before him. The house defied logic, he wrote. Corridors that should have connected doubled back on themselves. Doors opened to blank walls. Staircases changed direction between floors. And everywhere, carved into the woodwork, were symbols, intricate patterns that seemed to pull at the eye. When he showed his findings to Lila, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She begged him to stop investigating, saying only that some things in this house are better left undisturbed. That afternoon, Eleanor announced they would be having a special Sunday lunch the following day, a family tradition to welcome Daniel properly. The mention of Sunday caused a visible reaction in both Catherine and Margot, while Lila became even more withdrawn. That evening, Catherine approached Daniel with an unusual request to examine architectural features in the basement, claiming his fresh perspective might help them understand the original builder's intent. Something in her manner made him decline. Instead, Daniel spent the evening discussing his growing concerns with Lila, who finally revealed fragments of the truth. She told him her family practiced old ways that outsiders wouldn't understand and warned him not to drink from the silver chalice during Sunday lunch. When pressed, she became distraught, saying only that her sisters' husbands had contributed to the family in ways they hadn't understood or consented to. This partial warning proved crucial. In the early hours of Sunday morning, while the household slept, Daniel slipped out of the guest room and made his way to Eleanor's study, the one room that had remained locked since their arrival. What he found inside would confirm his worst suspicions. The study contained artifacts dating back centuries, ritual daggers, dried herbs, and a collection of silver chalices, each engraved with names and dates. The most recent bore the names Michael Grayson and James Whittaker. But it was what Daniel found in Eleanor's desk that truly revealed the horror awaiting him. A hidden compartment contained journals documenting centuries of the communion ritual, detailed accounts of how each husband had been prepared, drained, and ultimately consumed in the final ceremony. Most chilling were the preparations for that very Sunday, outlining how Daniel would be served wine mixed with a compound to begin the opening of channels, and how Lila would be expected to complete her initiation by leading Daniel to the central chamber for the first extraction. "I took photographs of everything," Daniel wrote. "Using my phone, I emailed copies to my editor with instructions to contact authorities if he didn't hear from me by Monday morning." When he returned to the guest room, Lila was missing. A note on the pillow read simply, "Basement. Hidden door behind wine rack. Hurry." The Sunday lunch was scheduled for noon. It was now 9 a.m. Daniel had 3 hours to find Lila and escape before the ritual began. What he didn't know was that Eleanor, sensing Lila's reluctance, had accelerated the timeline. Following the hidden passage, Daniel descended into the basement. The entrance to the ritual chambers was disguised as an ordinary root cellar, but a section of the wall swung inward when pressed in the right spot, just as described in Eleanor's journal. In the second chamber, Daniel found something shocking: a series of alcoves containing cocoon-like structures made of translucent, amber material. When he wiped away the dusty surface of one, he saw the desiccated but recognizable face of Michael Grayson, eyes open but unseeing. In the next chamber, he found a similar cocoon containing what he believed to be James Whittaker, the preservation less complete, the figure more withered. In the central chamber, Daniel finally found Lila, but not alone. Eleanor, Catherine, and Margot surrounded the stone altar at the center of the room, preparing the ritual implements: the silver chalice, a ceremonial knife, and bowls containing dried herbs and viscous liquids. Lila was arguing with her family, insisting the ritual was wrong, that it was murder disguised as tradition. Eleanor responded that choice was irrelevant, that the Allen bloodline had survived for centuries through the communion ritual, and that Lila's reluctance was merely temporary resistance to her true nature. Daniel's presence was discovered when Catherine noticed him at the chamber entrance. In the confrontation that followed, Lila grabbed the ritual chalice and smashed it against the altar. The effect was immediate. Eleanor screamed in agony as her skin began to wrinkle before their eyes. Catherine gasped as though something was being pulled from her body, and Margot collapsed entirely. Amid the chaos, Daniel and Lila fled toward the exit. As they passed through the chamber containing James Whittaker's cocoon, they noticed movement. The figure inside was stirring, the amber-like casing cracking. Understanding that the destruction of the chalice was releasing the trapped essences, they used a ritual knife to pierce the cocoons containing James and Michael. Taking James's whispered directions, they made their way to the old well and found a tunnel containing more cocoons, at least a dozen men in various states of preservation. They broke every cocoon they could find, releasing men who had been trapped for decades or even centuries. By the time they returned to the house, the Allen women had followed them from the basement. But they were transformed. Eleanor now appeared as the ancient woman she truly was. Catherine had aged decades in minutes, and Margot was barely conscious. "It's not just the men," Eleanor rasped. "You've killed us all. The essence returns to its source when released. Without it, we are what we should have been centuries ago, dust and memory." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of police, alerted by Daniel's editor. The officers witnessed the Allen women aging rapidly until nothing remained but dust and clothing. The search that followed revealed the full extent of the horror beneath the mansion. In total, 17 men were found in the cocoons, spanning centuries of Allen family history. Only James Whittaker survived more than a few hours after release. Daniel Harper documented everything in his Pulitzer-winning series, The Communion, 3 Centuries of Ritual Murder in Vermont. The Allen mansion was demolished in 2005, the well sealed with concrete, and the property declared off-limits. But the story wasn't over. James Whittaker, though physically recovered, described feeling partially hollowed out, as though essential parts of his consciousness had been permanently removed. And Lila Allen, the only survivor of the family lineage, faced a choice: to flee from the horror of her ancestry or to confront it directly. There's a well in Vermont that remains sealed to this day, not with boards or chains, but with reinforced concrete and government warnings. The land around it sits empty, the mansion that once stood there reduced to foundation stones and memories. But locals say that on certain Sundays, when the moon is dark and the wind blows from the east, you can still hear whispers rising from beneath that concrete seal. Whispers in the voices of men long dead, and women who should have died centuries ago. This is the conclusion to our investigation into the Allen family and their ritual of communion, a practice that sustained them for over 300 years until a journalist named Daniel Harper and a reluctant Allen daughter named Lila brought it crashing down in the autumn of 2004. If you followed our journey through this dark chapter of American history, take a moment now to subscribe for more investigations into the shadows lurking beneath our nation's surface. And share in the comments. Do you believe some ancient practices still continue in the remote corners of our modern world? Now, let us examine the aftermath of that fateful Sunday, and the final echoes of a pact made centuries ago in the forests of Eastern Europe. When the dust that had once been Eleanor, Catherine, and Margot Allen settled on the floor of the mansion's entrance hall, a chapter of history that had spanned continents and centuries appeared to close. But as Daniel Harper would discover in the months that followed, endings are rarely as definitive as they first appear. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Police and emergency services descended on the Allen estate, confronted with a scene that defied explanation. 3 piles of dust and clothing where women had stood moments before. A withered man later identified as James Whittaker, babbling about chambers and cocoons. Daniel Harper frantically insisting there were more survivors in the tunnels beneath the property, and Lila Allen, the last of her bloodline, in a state of shock so profound she did not speak for 3 days. "I've been a police officer for 27 years, said Chief Robert Lawson in his official statement. "I've seen murder, suicide, every kind of human tragedy. But what we found at the Allen place, that wasn't just a crime scene. That was something from another time, another world. Something that shouldn't have been possible." The investigation that followed was unprecedented in scope. The FBI became involved, bringing specialists in occult crimes and historical ritualism. The property was cordoned off, the well entrance secured, and the tunnel system carefully explored by teams in hazmat suits, a precaution that proved wise when 2 officers who touched the amber-like substance of the broken cocoons developed symptoms similar to radiation poisoning. "The material contained some kind of biohazard," explained Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who treated the affected officers. "Their cells showed signs of accelerated aging, similar to what witnesses described happening to the Allen women. Fortunately, the exposure was minimal, and both men recovered after treatment." In total, 17 cocoons were discovered in the tunnel system, some containing remains so ancient they crumbled to dust when disturbed, others preserving men who had disappeared as recently as the 1940s. Forensic analysis would later match 5 of these remains to unsolved missing persons cases, including Michael Grayson. Only James Whittaker survived. After 6 months of intensive medical care and psychological treatment, he was able to provide a coherent account of what had happened to him, an account that aligned with the journals found in Eleanor's study and the evidence gathered from the ritual chambers. "They take you piece by piece," James explained in a recorded interview with federal investigators. "Each Sunday, a little more of you gets transferred to them. It's not just physical, it's your memories, your personality, parts of your consciousness. By the final ceremony, you're barely aware of what's happening. You know something is wrong, but you can't resist. Then you wake up in that cocoon, aware but unable to move, preserved but slowly fading. And you feel them, the women who took parts of you, living with pieces of your mind inside them." James's testimony provided the missing link that explained the pattern observed by townsfolk over generations. How Catherine had developed Michael's interest in architecture after his disappearance, how Margot had acquired James's medical knowledge. The communion ritual wasn't just transferring life force, it was absorbing aspects of the victims' very identities. The journals recovered from Eleanor's study revealed the full history of the practice. How Eleonora Alenescu and her daughters had fled the Carpathian region in the 1660s after discovering an ancient ritual that allowed them to extend their lives by consuming the essence of men who loved them. How they had perfected this process over centuries, refining it from the crude blood rituals of their ancestors into the more sophisticated communion practiced in the Allen mansion. Most disturbing was the revelation that the ritual required emotional connection, that the Allen women deliberately cultivated love in their victims because love made the essence transfer more complete. This explained the careful selection of husbands throughout the Allen family history and the unusual charisma noted in all the Allen women. It wasn't just predation, explained Professor Kovacs. It was cultivation. They needed men who would surrender not just their bodies but their hearts. The ritual used love as a channel for the transfer of essence. The stronger the emotional bond, the more complete the communion. For Daniel Harper, the investigation's aftermath brought both professional recognition and personal trauma. His series of articles documenting the Allen case won him the Pulitzer Prize and established him as one of America's foremost investigative journalists. But the experience also left him with nightmares, trust issues, and what one psychiatrist diagnosed as metaphysical PTSD, a profound disruption of his understanding of reality. "I went into that house a rational man," Daniel wrote in the epilogue to his book on the case. "I left knowing that some of our most primitive fears, of witchcraft, of soul-stealing, of ancient evils hiding in plain sight, have roots in reality. That changes you forever." Daniel's relationship with Lila Allen became another casualty of the ritual's end. Though she had saved his life by destroying the chalice, the revelation of her family's true nature created a barrier between them that proved insurmountable. After providing testimony to authorities, Lila disappeared from public view, changing her name and relocating to an undisclosed location. "She couldn't escape the knowledge of what she was," Daniel wrote. "What blood flowed in her veins. What inheritance she carried. She told me once that she could feel the hunger sometimes, the desire to take, to consume, to live beyond her natural span. She was terrified she would eventually give in to it, find another way to continue what her ancestors had begun." James Whittaker's fate proved equally challenging. Though physically recovered, he struggled with what he described as partial existence. The sensation that essential parts of his being remained missing, absorbed by women who had turned to dust before his eyes. "I see them sometimes, in my dreams," he told Daniel during an interview conducted in 2006. "Not as they were at the end, but as they were when they were strongest, when they had the most of me inside them. And in those dreams, I'm not trying to escape. I'm trying to get back to them, to be whole again. That's the true horror of what they did. They made us want to be consumed." James eventually relocated to Arizona, where the dry climate and distance from Vermont provided some respite from his symptoms. He died in 2017, leaving behind a sealed memoir to be published only after Daniel Harper's death, a precaution he insisted upon, claiming the full truth would put Daniel in danger from others who practice variations of the communion. The Allen property remained unoccupied, declared a biohazard site by federal authorities. The mansion was demolished in 2005, the ritual chambers filled with concrete, and the well sealed with a specialized cap designed to contain what one official report cryptically referred to as persistent anomalous phenomena. But the story did not end there. In 2010, Daniel Harper received an anonymous package containing a silver fragment. Analysis would later confirm it came from the ritual chalice Lila had destroyed. Attached was a note in handwriting he recognized as Lila's. "They're finding another way. The hunger never dies." Disturbed by this message, Daniel began investigating other families with unusual longevity patterns. His research uncovered several bloodlines across America with similarities to the Allens. Families where women outlived their husbands by decades, where men disappeared under mysterious circumstances, where certain physical characteristics and behaviors persisted across generations in ways that defied conventional genetics. The Allens weren't unique, Daniel concluded in notes for a follow-up investigation he never published. They were just one branch of something older and more widespread. Something that has adapted and evolved alongside human civilization, finding new ways to feed as society changes. Daniel's investigation came to an abrupt halt in 2012 when he suffered a mysterious illness that left him bedridden for months. Though doctors could find no specific cause, his symptoms mirrored those described in Eleanor's journals as affecting men who had begun the communion process but not completed it: extreme fatigue, cognitive disruption, and a sensation he described as being unmade from the inside. After his recovery, Daniel abandoned his research into communion-practicing families. He moved to New Zealand, as far from Vermont as possible, and turned his journalistic attention to safer topics. His only public statement on the matter came in response to a question at a literary festival in 2015. Some doors, once opened, can't be fully closed again. The Allen ritual is finished, but what it represented, the human desire to transcend death, to consume others for our own benefit, that continues in 1,000 forms. The communion was just one manifestation of something woven into our darkest impulses. The town of Ashmore Hollow never fully recovered from the revelations about the Allen family. Tourism briefly surged as thrill-seekers and paranormal enthusiasts descended on the village, but most local businesses found the attention more curse than blessing. Today, the town deliberately downplays its connection to the case, focusing instead on its colonial architecture and autumn foliage. But on certain nights, locals still avoid the road that leads to where the Allen mansion once stood. The sealed well remains, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. Instruments placed there by researchers occasionally register unexplained energy fluctuations, particularly on Sundays when the moon is new. And what of Lila Allen? The official record states only that she provided testimony to authorities and then, using a federal witness protection program, established a new identity. But rumors persist. A nurse in Seattle reports treating a patient who never seemed to age. A professor in Montreal describes a colleague whose touch left him inexplicably exhausted. A man in Santa Fe filed a missing persons report for his wife, who disappeared after Sunday lunch with a new friend, a friend whose description matches Lila's. None of these reports has been verified. None has been completely disproven. In 2018, 14 years after the events at the Allen Mansion, Daniel Harper received a final package, postmarked from Vermont, though the Allen property had stood empty for over a decade. Inside was a small vial containing a clear liquid and a note in familiar handwriting. Some hungers can be managed, not just destroyed. I found another way. If you begin to fade, drink this. A part of me will always protect you. Daniel never revealed whether he used the contents of the vial. His health stabilized in his final years, and he died peacefully in his sleep in 2023, leaving behind an unfinished manuscript titled Communion, the Wider Pattern. The well in Vermont remains sealed. The ritual as practiced by the Allen family is ended. But in remote corners of America, in old houses where certain families have lived for generations, in towns where some bloodlines seem blessed with unusual longevity, Sunday dinners still take place. Silver chalices are still raised. And sometimes, men still disappear. The hunger, as Lila warned, never truly dies. It only adapts. If you find yourself invited to such a Sunday meal, remember the Allen family of Ashmore Hollow. Remember the silver chalice. And before you drink, consider what price you might unknowingly pay for loving someone whose ancestors made a pact long ago, a pact that granted life by taking it from others. Some traditions, once begun, find ways to continue. Some hungers, once awakened, never truly fade.